The Great Hall was quiet. Too quiet for a place where 12 different alien species were supposed to make important decisions. Ambassador Jiho looked around the massive chamber, watching the strange beings that filled the curved seats. Some had scales that changed color when they moved. Others looked like they were made of light itself. A few had too many eyes, and some had no eyes at all. Jiho stood at the center of it all, feeling very small and very human. Next to him, his assistant Minho held a datapad with shaking hands. They had practiced this moment for months, but nothing could prepare them for the real thing. The Galactic Council was humanity's chance to join something bigger. For 300 years, humans had watched other species work together, trade together, and fight together. Now Earth finally had the technology to be part of that group. But first, they had to prove they belonged. The reason for today's meeting was simple but terrifying. A species called the Void Swarm was eating entire star systems. They consumed everything. Planets, stars, even the space between them. 43 star systems had already been destroyed. The Council needed every strong species to fight back, and humans wanted to help. Taman, the representative from the Scarith Empire, shifted in his seat. His lizard-like body was covered in green and gold scales, and his yellow eyes never blinked. He had been watching the humans for the past hour without saying a word. Now he raised one clawed hand. "Before we talk about war," Taman said, his voice making a hissing sound with each word, "we must understand your spiritual ways. Every species here follows the same basic rule. We all have gods who guide us in battle. These war gods teach us how to fight with honor and strength." Other council members nodded their various heads. Yuna, who looked like a tall woman made of blue light, spoke next. "The war gods are very important," she said. Her voice sounded like music, but there was worry in it. "They help us stay strong but also stay good. Without them, war becomes something terrible." Jiho felt his mouth go dry. This was the question they had hoped no one would ask. On the long trip to the council station, he and Minho had talked about many possible problems. They had prepared answers for questions about human technology, human culture, and human history. But they had not prepared for this. "Tell us about your war god," said Korax, a being that looked like a giant insect with blue skin.
"What does this god teach your warriors?"
"How does your god help you fight with honor?" The chamber fell silent again. Every alien eye, sensor, and whatever else they used to see was pointed at Jiho. He could feel their curiosity, their expectation, and something else, their growing worry. Jiho looked at Minho, who gave him a small nod. They had agreed that if this question came up, they would tell the truth. But now, facing all these powerful beings, the truth felt very heavy. "We don't have a war god," Jiho said quietly. The reaction was immediate and loud. Gasps, clicks, buzzes, and sounds that had no human names filled the air. Several council members stood up from their seats. Others began talking rapidly in languages that made no sense to human ears. Yuna's light form flickered like a broken lamp. "That's impossible," she said. "How do you fight without divine guidance? How do you know when to show mercy? How do you keep from becoming monsters?" Taman's scales had turned a dark red color. "Every civilized species needs a war god," he said, his voice getting louder. "The god tells warriors when to fight and when to stop. The god teaches the difference between necessary killing and murder. Without a war god, there is only chaos." Korax made a sound like grinding metal. "We cannot allow a godless species into our military alliance. It would be too dangerous. You could do anything in battle. Anything at all," more voices joined in. The chamber filled with alien words and sounds of fear and anger. Some council members were already calling for the humans to be removed from the station. Others demanded to know how Earth had become so advanced without proper spiritual guidance. Jiho raised his hands, trying to get their attention. "Please," he called out. "Let me explain." It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it did, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed completely. Before there had been curiosity and hope. Now there was suspicion and fear. "You said you don't have a war god," said Do-Yun, the oldest member of the council. His species looked like very tall, very thin humans, but with silver skin and black eyes. "But you must have had one once. All species begin with gods. What happened to yours?" This was the moment Jiho had been dreading. He looked up at the viewing screen that showed Earth hanging in space. From here, his home planet looked peaceful and beautiful. It was hard to believe such a quiet-looking world could hide such a violent history. "We had a war god once," Jiho said slowly. His name was Jiantu. He was strong and wise, and he taught our ancestors how to fight. And where is this Jiantu now? Asked Yuna, though her musical voice suggested she already suspected the answer. Jiho took a deep breath. Around him, the council chamber was completely silent. Even the air recyclers seemed to have stopped humming. We killed him, Jiho said. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of curiosity or expectation. It was the silence of shock and horror. It was the silence of beings who had just learned that the species they were considering as allies had committed the ultimate crime. You murdered your own god? Taman whispered, his scales now completely black. Why? Asked Korax, his insect-like features twisting with confusion and disgust. Jiho looked around the chamber one more time. Every face, whether covered in scales made of light or featuring too many eyes, showed the same expression of horror. He knew that what he said next would either convince them that humans were necessary allies, or guarantee that humanity would face the Void Swarm alone. Because, Jiho said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, he was too soft. The great temple stood on the highest mountain in Korea, its red walls reaching up into the storm clouds. Lightning crashed around the building, but the stone walls never shook. This was the home of Jiantu, the god of war, and it had stood here for over 1,000 years. Inside the temple, the air was thick with smoke from burning incense. The smell of metal and old blood mixed with the sweet smoke. Weapons hung on every wall, swords, spears, axes, and stranger things that had no names. Each weapon had taken lives in service to the god. Jiantu himself sat on a throne made from the shields of defeated armies. He was huge, almost twice as tall as a normal man, with broad shoulders and arms covered in old scars. His armor was made of dark bronze that never seemed to get dirty, and his face looked like it had seen every battle ever fought. His eyes were the color of old blood, and they held the wisdom of someone who understood both victory and defeat. Before the god knelt 3 humans. These were not ordinary people. They were the greatest warriors of their time, chosen by Jiantu himself to carry his blessing into battle. Wujin the Unbreakable was the largest of the 3. His body was covered in scars from 100 battles, but he had never been defeated. When Wujin fought, it was said that arrows would bend rather than pierce his skin, and swords would break rather than cut his flesh. Next to him knelt Nari the Blade Dancer. She was smaller than Wujin, but her speed was legendary. She carried 2 curved swords that moved so fast they looked like silver light. In the last war, she had killed 30 enemy soldiers in less than a minute. The third warrior was Kyung the Siegebreaker. He was the smartest of the 3, a master of war machines and battle plans. When cities tried to hide behind their walls, Kyung found ways to knock those walls down. He had never failed to take a city he wanted to capture. These 3 warriors had served Jiantu faithfully for many years. They had won great victories and brought honor to their god. But today something was different. Today their god seemed troubled. My children, Jiantu said, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. I have been watching your people. I have seen the wars you fight in my name, and I am concerned. Wujin raised his scarred face to look at his god. Great Jiantu, do we not serve you well? Have we not won every battle? Our enemies fear the sound of our war cries. Their armies break and run when they see our banners. Yes, Jiantu said slowly. You win your battles. You are strong and fierce and clever, but winning is not everything. Nari spoke up, confusion in her voice. Lord Jiantu, you taught us that strength decides who lives and who dies. You taught us that the strong must take what they need and the weak must give way. Have we learned these lessons wrong? The god was quiet for a long moment. Lightning flashed outside the temple, lighting up his bronze armor. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with sadness. When I first came to your people, they were weak and scattered. Other tribes took their food, their land, their children. I gave you my blessing so you could protect yourselves. I taught you to be strong so you could defend your homes and families. And we have done this, Kyung said. We have protected our people. We have made them safe. Have you? Jiantu asked. Yesterday I watched an army carrying my blessing attack a village of farmers. These farmers had never hurt anyone. They grew food and raised children and sang songs in the evening. But your warriors killed them all because they wanted the farmers' land. The 3 champions looked at each other. They remembered that battle. It had been a good victory, quick and complete with few losses on their side. The farmers were in our way, Wujin said. The land was good for growing crops, and we needed those crops to feed our army. War requires difficult choices. I watched children die, Jontu said, his voice getting louder. Children who had never held weapons. I watched old people beg for mercy and receive none. I watched pregnant women killed for the crime of living in the wrong place. Nari's hand moved to the handle of her sword. Great Lord, war is war. There can be no half measures. You cannot fight an enemy while worrying about every innocent person who might get hurt. You taught us that victory requires total commitment. I taught you that strength should protect the innocent, Jontu corrected. I taught you to be fierce against those who would harm your people. I never taught you to become the very thing you were supposed to fight against. The god stood up from his throne, and the temple seemed to shake with his movement. His bronze armor caught the light from the lightning outside, making him look like a figure made of fire and metal. Too many of my followers have forgotten why I gave them strength, Jontu continued. They use my gifts not to protect but to take, not to defend but to conquer, not to serve justice but to serve greed. Kyung rose to his feet, and for the first time in years he looked angry at his god. You speak of justice and protection, but the world is not a peaceful place. Our enemies show no mercy. They do not spare our children or our old people. If we hold back, if we show weakness, they will destroy us. And if you become like them, Jontu said, then what have you really saved? The god walked to the temple's great window and looked out at the world below. In the distance, smoke rose from burning cities. Even from here, he could hear the faint sounds of battle. From this day forward, Jontu announced, my blessing comes with new rules. No warrior who carries my power will harm those who cannot fight back. No army bearing my mark will make war for conquest alone. You will fight to protect, or you will not fight with my help. The three champions stared at their god in shock. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Wu Jin found his voice. You would make us weak, he said. You would tie our hands while our enemies keep theirs free. I would make you worthy of the power I have given you, Jontu replied. Nari stepped forward, her face red with anger. We have served you faithfully for years. We have brought you glory and honor. We have made your name feared across the world. And now you tell us we must fight with one hand tied behind our backs?
I tell you that power without restraint is not strength, it is madness, Jontu said.
I have seen what happens to species that embrace unlimited warfare. They destroy their enemies, then they destroy each other, and finally they destroy themselves. Kyung's mind was already working, thinking through the implications of what their god was saying. These new rules will cost us battles. They will cost us lives. Our own people will die because we cannot do what is necessary to win. Then perhaps, Jontu said sadly, some battles should not be won. The three warriors looked at each other again. In that moment, something changed between them and their god. The absolute trust and faith they had always felt began to crack. For the first time, they began to wonder if their god truly understood the world they lived in. The seeds of rebellion were planted in that temple, on that stormy night. The greatest warriors of humanity began to think thoughts that would have been impossible before. Thoughts about whether their god was still worthy of their worship. And in the years that followed, those thoughts would grow into something much more dangerous. 16 years had passed since Jontu announced his new rules for war. 16 years of losing battles that should have been easy wins. 16 years of watching enemies escape because the god's blessing would not allow pursuit of fleeing civilians. 16 years of growing anger among humanity's greatest warriors. The rebellion began in secret, in dark rooms where whispered words carried more weight than shouted orders. It started with Hyun, a brilliant strategist who had once been one of Jontu's most faithful priests. He was not as famous as Wu Jin, Nari, or Kyung, but he was perhaps more dangerous than all of them combined. While they knew how to fight, Hyun knew how to think. On a cold winter night, Hyun stood before a gathering of warriors in an abandoned temple outside Seoul. The building had once been dedicated to Jeontu, but it had been empty for years. The god's new rules had made many of his followers lose faith, and temples across the land sat empty and forgotten. Brothers and sisters, Hyun said to the 50 warriors who had answered his secret call, we gather tonight to speak truths that cannot be spoken in the light of day. The warriors looked around nervously. Even talking against their god felt dangerous. But they were here because they had all felt the same growing frustration. Last month, Hyun continued, the Northern Army lost to the Mongol raiders. Our soldiers were stronger, better trained, and better equipped. But when the enemy retreated into a village full of families, our blessing would not let us follow. The raiders escaped, took our supplies, and will return to attack us again next spring. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Every warrior present had a similar story. A battle lost, a victory stolen, a moment when Jontu's mercy had cost human lives. 3 weeks ago, said Minjay, a young warrior with fire in his eyes. My unit cornered a group of bandits who had been raiding our supply lines. But these bandits had children with them, their own children who they used as shields. Our God's blessing would not let us attack. The bandits escaped and killed 12 of our soldiers in their next raid. More voices joined in, story after story of battles lost because of divine mercy. Each tale made the gathered warriors angrier and more certain that something had to change. Wu Jin stood up slowly. The great warrior looked older now, his face marked by more scars and much more weariness. I have served Jontu faithfully for 30 years, he said. I have never questioned his wisdom before, but I cannot ignore what I see with my own eyes. He pointed to a young warrior named Sunho, barely 20 years old and already missing his left arm. This boy lost his limb because our God would not let us destroy an enemy supply depot that was hidden in a school. The enemy used that depot to arm the force that crippled Sunho. Tell me, where was Jontu's justice then? Nari stepped out of the shadows where she had been listening. Her twin swords were still as sharp as ever, but her eyes held a coldness that had not been there in her youth. The God speaks of honor and mercy, she said, her voice cutting through the cold air like her blades. But honor does not feed hungry soldiers. Mercy does not protect our borders. The enemy shows no such restraint, and they grow stronger while we grow weaker. Kyung, ever the strategist, spread a map on the broken altar at the front of the temple. Look at this, he said, pointing to various marked locations. In the past 5 years, we have lost 23 major engagements that we should have won. In each case, the turning point came when Jontu's blessing prevented us from taking necessary action. The warriors crowded around the map, seeing the truth laid out in stark detail. The pattern was clear and undeniable. The God has grown soft, Hyun said, speaking the words that everyone was thinking but no one had dared to say. He sits in his temple, removed from the reality of war, and makes rules that sound noble but cost lives. What are you suggesting? Asked Daeho, an older warrior who still wore the symbols of Jontu's priesthood. Hyun's eyes were cold and certain. I am suggesting that perhaps it is time for humanity to fight its own battles, to make its own rules, to win wars based on what is necessary, not what is merciful. The temple fell silent. Outside, winter wind howled through the empty streets. Inside, 50 of humanity's deadliest warriors contemplated the unthinkable. You speak of rebellion against a god, Daeho whispered. Such things are not possible, are they not? Hyun asked. He drew a sword from beneath his cloak. The weapon was beautiful and terrible, its blade inscribed with symbols that seemed to glow in the dim light. This is Godslayer, forged in secret over the past 2 years. The metal was taken from meteors that fell from heaven. The symbols were carved by priests who know the old magic. This blade can cut divine flesh as easily as mortal flesh. Several warriors stepped back in fear and awe. To create such a weapon was beyond dangerous. It was blasphemous. One sword cannot kill a god, Kyung pointed out, though his voice held more curiosity than condemnation. No, Hyun agreed, but 50 swords can. 100 swords, 500 swords. He gestured to the warriors around him. Every person here carries weapons blessed by Jontu himself. Those blessings can be turned against their source if we have the will to do it. The will to do what exactly? Nari asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. To free humanity from the chains of divine weakness, Hyun said. To take control of our own destiny. To fight wars the way they must be fought, without mercy, without restraint, without the luxury of moral limitations. Woojin was quiet for a long time, staring at the map with its marked defeats. Finally, he spoke. If we do this thing, he said slowly, there will be no going back. We will be alone in the universe with no God to guide us and no divine power to restrain us. Good, Hyun replied. Gods are for species too weak to rule themselves. One by one, the warriors began to nod their agreement. Fear gave way to determination. Doubt gave way to certainty. By the end of that night, the conspiracy was born. Over the following months, the rebellion spread. Secret meetings were held in abandoned temples and forgotten battlefields. Weapons were prepared, plans were made, and allies were recruited. The greatest warriors of humanity, the very people Jontu had blessed and empowered, turned those gifts against their source. On the night of the summer solstice, when Jontu's power was traditionally at its strongest, 500 warriors surrounded the great temple on Mount Sirak. They came not as worshippers but as executioners. Inside the temple, Jontu felt them coming. The god had known this day would arrive eventually. He had seen the pattern before in other species on other worlds. Power without wisdom always led to the same place, the destruction of anyone or anything that tried to impose limits. As the warriors broke down the temple doors, Jontu stood from his throne one final time. His bronze armor gleamed in the firelight, and his ancient eyes held not anger, but a terrible sadness. "My children," he said as they surrounded him with their blessed weapons, "you do not understand what you are about to unleash." "We understand perfectly," Hyun replied, raising Godslayer above his head. "We are unleashing ourselves." The battle that followed shook the earth and cracked the sky. But in the end, the god of war fell to the warriors he had created. His last words echoed through the burning temple as his divine essence faded away. "Without something greater than yourselves to restrain you, you will become the very monsters you once fought against, and the universe will tremble." As Jontu died, his power did not disappear. Instead, it flowed into the warriors who had killed him, making them stronger and more terrible than any human had ever been before. The age of gods was over. The age of unlimited human warfare had begun. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Jiho's words hung in the air like a poison cloud, making it hard for anyone to speak or even breathe properly. The alien delegates sat frozen in their seats, their various forms of eyes wide with shock and horror. Ambassador Jiho stood calmly in the center of it all, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked like a man who had just discussed the weather, not the murder of a divine being. Next to him, Minho held his datapad with steady hands, ready to provide whatever information the council might need. Taemin was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You killed your own god," he said, his scales shifting from black to a sickly yellow color. "A being who tried to teach you mercy and honor. How is such a thing even possible?" "It was not easy," Jiho admitted. "Gods are powerful beings, but they are not invincible. Especially when facing the very people they created and empowered. Our ancestors spent 2 years preparing for that night. They forged special weapons, learned forgotten magics, and gathered the strength of 500 blessed warriors." Yuna's light form flickered rapidly, like a candle in a strong wind. "But why?" she asked, her musical voice now broken and discordant. "Your god was trying to help you become better. He was trying to save you from becoming monsters." Minho stepped forward and activated his datapad. Images appeared in the air above them, historical records from Earth's ancient databases. The first image showed a battlefield covered in bodies with human warriors standing victorious but exhausted. "This was the Battle of Cheongju," Minho explained. "It happened 6 months before the rebellion. Our forces outnumbered the enemy 3-1. We had better weapons, better training, and better position. But we lost because Jontu's blessing would not allow us to attack enemy soldiers who were hiding among civilians." The image changed to show another battlefield, this one with burning buildings in the background. The siege of Busan. We could have ended it in 1 day by collapsing the enemy's main supply tunnel. But the tunnel ran under a school. Jontu's restriction prevented the attack. The siege lasted 4 months and we lost 8,000 soldiers. More images flashed by. Battle after battle where divine mercy had cost human lives. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Korax, the insectoid representative, made a grinding sound with his mandibles. "These restrictions may have cost you some battles, but they also kept you from becoming evil. Every species needs moral limits in war. Without them, conflict becomes genocide. Does it?" Jiho asked. He gestured to Minho, who brought up a new set of images. These showed Earth as it appeared today. Peaceful cities, green farmlands, and clear blue skies. "After we killed Jontu, we fought many more wars," Jiho continued. "The Mongol invasions, the unification wars, the great resource conflicts. In every case, we won decisively because we were willing to do whatever was necessary. The result is the Earth you see now, united, peaceful, and strong. At what cost?" demanded Sarah. a delegate from the crystalline hegemony whose body looked like living diamond. How many innocents died for your victories? Fewer than would have died in longer wars, Minho answered without hesitation. Our military historians have run the calculations many times. Quick, decisive campaigns with no restrictions save more lives overall than prolonged conflicts with moral limitations. Do-yun, the ancient arbiter, had been silent throughout the conversation. Now he stood slowly, his silver skin seeming to glow in the chamber's light. You speak of efficiency in killing as if it were a virtue, he said. Every other species in this council maintains connection to divine wisdom precisely to avoid such thinking. And how has that divine wisdom served you against the Void Swarm? Jiho asked pointedly. 43 star systems consumed, millions of ships destroyed, billions of lives lost. Your gods teach you to fight with honor, but honor means nothing to an enemy that devours everything in its path. The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. Instead of pure horror, there was now argument and debate. Some delegates still insisted that humanity's godless nature made them too dangerous to trust. Others began to whisper about the necessity of unlimited warfare against an unlimited enemy. Yuna raised a glowing hand for silence. Even if we accept your reasoning, she said carefully, how can we trust you? If you were willing to kill your own god for being too merciful, what would you do to allies who tried to restrain you? It was a fair question, and Jiho had expected it. You are not our gods, he said simply. You did not create us or claim authority over us. We have no desire to rule over other species. We simply want to survive and help others survive. The Void Swarm threatens all of us equally. But after the swarm is defeated, Taemin said, his scales still pale with fear, what then? Will you simply return to your own space and leave the rest of us alone? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Jiho looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried clearly throughout the hall. That depends, he said, on whether anyone gives us a reason to do otherwise. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Several delegates shifted nervously in their seats. Korak stood up abruptly. This is exactly what we feared, he said. You admit that you would turn on your allies if they displease you. How is that different from the swarm itself? The difference, Jiho replied calmly, is that we can be reasoned with. The swarm cannot. We can be negotiated with. The swarm cannot. We can be satisfied with victory. The swarm cannot. We want to preserve civilization, even if we have to destroy parts of it to save the whole. Minho activated his datapad again, showing new images, these ones depicting the Void Swarm's latest attacks. Planets stripped bare of all life, stars dimmed by the creatures feeding on their energy, entire systems reduced to empty space. Your honorable warfare has achieved nothing against this enemy, Minho said. Your gods tell you to preserve life, to show mercy, to maintain moral superiority. Noble goals. But the swarm cares nothing for your nobility. While you debate ethics, they consume entire worlds. Sarah's crystalline form reflected the images of destruction, fracturing them into thousands of glittering pieces. So you propose we abandon everything that makes us civilized? Become monsters to fight monsters? We propose you let us be the monsters, Jiho corrected. We already crossed that line 3,000 years ago. We have lived with the consequences ever since. We know how to win wars that others cannot win, against enemies that others cannot defeat. And what makes you think you can defeat the swarm when we cannot? Asked Yuna. Jiho smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, the expression was genuinely warm. But there was something cold behind his eyes that made several delegates step back. Because, he said, when we encounter an enemy that devours everything in its path, our first instinct is not to find a way to fight it honorably. Our first instinct is to find a way to kill it completely. The chamber fell silent once more. Outside the great windows, stars twinkled peacefully in the void, showing no sign of the horror that was consuming entire systems somewhere in the distance. Do-hyun spoke into the silence, his ancient voice heavy with the weight of centuries. I have lived for over 2,000 years, he said. I have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Many were destroyed by external enemies, but more were destroyed by the compromises they made to survive those enemies. Then you understand our choice, Jiho said. 3,000 years ago, humanity decided we would rather rule over ashes than be buried beneath them. That decision has kept us alive and strong ever since. And what does that make you? Taman asked quietly. Jiho looked up at the viewing screen where Earth hung in space, beautiful, peaceful, and utterly deceptive in its innocence. Survivors, he said simply. And right now that is exactly what the galaxy needs. 3 months had passed since the council meeting. 3 months of heated debates, angry accusations, and careful negotiations. In the end, fear of the Void Swarm had won over fear of humanity. The alliance was formed, but it came with conditions that no one was fully happy with. Admiral Hana stood on the bridge of the human fleet command ship Retribution, watching dozens of alien vessels move into formation around her. The combined fleet was impressive. Over 300 ships from 13 different species, all working together for the first time in galactic history. Behind her, representatives from the various alien governments stood nervously. They had insisted on observing human military tactics firsthand before fully committing to the alliance. Now they were about to get exactly what they had asked for. "Admiral," called out Jiwan from the tactical station, "we're receiving the final scanner readings from the Kepler 442 system." "The swarm presence is extensive," Hana nodded grimly. The Kepler system had been humanity's first choice for the demonstration, because it represented everything wrong with the current war effort. The system contained 7 planets, 3 of which had been inhabited by peaceful mining colonies. The Void Swarm had arrived 6 weeks ago and immediately began their feeding process. "Give me the numbers," Hana ordered. 7 billion swarm entities confirmed, Jiwan reported. They've already consumed 2/3 of the 4th planet and have begun feeding on the system's star. Estimated time until complete system consumption, 14 days. Taman, who had insisted on personally observing this mission, shifted uncomfortably behind the Admiral. His scales had been a nervous yellow color ever since boarding the human ship. "Admiral," he said carefully, "my government has asked me to remind you of the evacuation protocols. There are still 3 million colonists trapped on the remaining planets. Surely rescue operations must take priority over military action." Admiral Hana turned to face the alien observer. Her expression was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply practical. "Observer Taman, how many rescue operations have your fleets attempted against swarm-occupied systems?" 47, Taman replied proudly. "We have saved over 2 million civilian lives. And how many of those systems did you successfully reclaim?" Taman's scales darkened. "None, but we saved who we could. Which is why the swarm now controls 43 star systems instead of being contained at their point of origin," Hana said bluntly. "Every time you choose rescue over victory, you give them more time to grow stronger." Yuna's light form flickered with distress. "Are you saying you will not attempt to save the colonists? That you will simply abandon them to die? I'm saying that saving 3 million people while allowing the swarm to escape and consume 3 billion more is not a victory," Hana replied. "Watch and learn how humans fight wars." The human fleet moved with a precision that impressed even the critical alien observers. Instead of the chaotic battle formations they were used to seeing, every ship moved with perfect coordination. The fleet split into 3 groups, each targeting a different aspect of the swarm's presence in the system. Fleet Group Alpha, target the consumption nodes on Planet 4, Hana ordered. Beta Group, hit the feeding tendrils attached to the star. Gamma Group, eliminate the swarm's reproduction centers on the outer planets. Korax watched the tactical display with growing alarm. "Admiral, you're targeting the planets themselves. What about the colonists still alive down there?" "What about them?" asked Minsu, the human tactical coordinator. His tone was genuinely curious, as if he didn't understand the question. "They're innocent people," Sarah said, her crystalline form reflecting the lights of the bridge. "Non-combatants who deserve protection." "They're already dead," Minsu replied matter-of-factly. "The swarm has been feeding on them for 6 weeks. Even if we could somehow extract them from the consumption nodes, they've been so thoroughly infected with swarm DNA that they're no longer technically human. We would be rescuing swarm hybrids, not colonists." The alien observers fell silent as this horrible truth sank in. They had been trying to save people who could no longer be saved. "Commence firing," Admiral Hana ordered. What followed was unlike anything the alien observers had ever seen. The human weapons did not target individual swarm ships or even military installations. Instead, they targeted the fundamental systems that kept the swarm alive. Massive antimatter charges, each one powerful enough to crack a moon, detonated simultaneously around Planet 4. The explosions were so bright that the bridge windows automatically darkened to protect everyone's vision. When the light faded, the planet was simply gone. 7 billion swarm entities had been vaporized in an instant. Direct hit on Target 1, G1 reported calmly. Planet 4 eliminated. Swarm feeding operation terminated. Taman stared at the empty space where a world had existed moments before. You destroyed an entire planet, with people still on it. We ended their suffering quickly, corrected Chanwu, the fleet psychologist. The alternative was letting the swarm consume them slowly over several weeks. Our way was more merciful. The second wave of attacks targeted the massive feeding tendrils that the swarm had attached to the system's star. These organic structures, each one larger than a battleship, were how the creatures drained stellar energy to fuel their reproduction. Normally, Allied fleets tried to carefully cut these tendrils while preserving the star's stability. The humans simply destroyed everything. Nuclear. Fire erupted around the star as torpedo after torpedo found their mark. The feeding tendrils were not carefully severed, they were obliterated. The star itself was badly damaged, its outer layers blown away by the explosions. It would survive, but it would never burn as brightly again. Stellar feeding operation eliminated, G1 announced. Star damage within acceptable parameters. Acceptable? Yuna gasped. You've shortened that star's lifespan by millions of years. Any planets in this system will freeze. Any planets in this system were already doomed, Admiral Hana pointed out. At least now they'll freeze instead of being digested. The final phase of the attack was the most brutal. The outer planets of the system had been converted into swarm breeding grounds. Their surfaces covered with massive organic structures that produced new swarm entities every few hours. Previous Allied attacks had tried to capture these facilities intact, hoping to study swarm biology and find weaknesses. The humans had no such interest in preservation. Planet killer. Weapons. Devices so powerful they were banned by every galactic treaty. Fired, simultaneously at all 3 breeding worlds. The planets didn't just explode, they were reduced to their component atoms. In less than 5 minutes, 3 worlds and everything on them simply ceased to exist. All swarm reproduction facilities eliminated, G1 reported. System purge complete. The alien observers stood in horrified silence. In less than an hour, the humans had done something that had never been accomplished before. They had completely eliminated a swarm infestation. But the cost had been staggering. 6 planets destroyed, Sarah whispered. An entire solar system rendered uninhabitable. Billions of lives ended without a chance for salvation. And 1 swarm infestation permanently eliminated, Admiral Hana added. With 0 human casualties and no possibility of swarm escape or regrowth. Do-Yun, who had remained silent throughout the entire battle, finally spoke. His ancient voice was heavy with sorrow and understanding. I begin to see why you killed your god of war, he said. No divine being could watch such tactics and remain unchanged. Our god tried to teach us mercy, Chanwu explained. He wanted us to find ways to win without becoming monsters. But sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something worse. Taman's scales had turned completely black. What you've shown us today, it's effective, yes, but it's also terrifying. How can we work alongside beings capable of such destruction? Admiral Hana walked to the viewing screen, where the remnants of the Kepler system glowed faintly in the distance. Because, she said quietly, in 18 hours we'll jump to the next swarm-occupied system. Tomorrow we'll hit 3 more. By the end of the month, we'll have pushed them back 20 systems using losses they can't sustain. And after the swarm is defeated? Asked Yuna, though her musical voice suggested she was afraid of the answer. After the swarm is defeated, Hana said, turning back to face the alien observers, we'll return to our own space and continue being the monsters the universe needs us to be. We've been practicing for 3,000 years. We're very good at it. As the human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, the alien observers finally understood what they had allied themselves with. They had invited humanity into their war not as partners, but as weapons, and weapons once used could never be completely controlled. In saving the galaxy from the Void Swarm, they had potentially doomed it to something far worse, an alliance, with beings who had learned to win by abandoning everything that made victory worthwhile. But as the stars shifted around them and another swarm system came into view, none of the observers suggested turning back. The monsters they had unleashed were their monsters now. and the universe would simply have to live with the consequences. After all, when faced with a choice between extinction and survival at any cost, even gods would choose survival.